let's start at the very top. We hear this phrase AI constantly, but from someone who's actually built, deployed, scaled AI in enterprise across several major European banks, what is artificial intelligence?
I think you can break down AI in terms of, look, the original research around AI was in the 70s. It's the current wave is all around a specific vanilla sort of AI, which is sort of the OpenAI, ChatGPT. But within that, there is a variety and a range of different capabilities. And it's all around taking our existing knowledge and understanding base and applying it to problems in a structured and organized way. So just creating software and automation to solve problems. So it's not that much of a change from the principles of a database or a website or whatever it is. It's different because it's a paradigm shift because it looks like magic.
Yeah.
Right, and it's magical. Statistics at that level is magical. It's just amazing what can be predicted and what can be done. Right, and I think that's, if you boil it down, that's where you're at. Now, the layers and the technology and how we got to, ChatGPT, right, are non-trivial. They are one of the wonders of the model world. This is game changing in the same way that the internet was, 40 years ago. Right? But it's another evolution of the technology landscape.
Yeah. And you've obviously seen AI evolve through banks, financial services firms. So how much has the tech actually evolved over the last few years?
I think it's a composite. It's okay. So the tech's morphed with the banks and with the financial institutions that we've been working with. So if we reverse course like 10 years ago, we were all talking about big data and analytics and, we need to have all this consistency around data. And that was probably the evolution point where we started to think of data rather than as a necessary evil to make decisions, as a core part of the way an organization runs and operationally how we can take advantage of that data to optimize things like, routing of voice calls into in call centers so it goes to the right team at the right time based upon the context that user is called. So if I were to, as a customer of NatWest, were to call up the call center, because it knows I've been on my phone and I've been looking at my bank balance or my mortgage balance or all my credit cards, right? And it can give me options of where I'm going to land. If I've half finished a loan application, right, I'm more than likely going to be calling about that loan. If I've gone into a transaction and I've been staring at the transaction, understanding that from the core model of data we've collected across the website, the mobile app, around things, the context information that the organization's being able to pull together and make a decision on who needs to answer my call, how that can be best answered, and collate all of that information holistically for that person that's picking up the phone. That's something that we've never really been able to achieve at the level that we're now capable of doing. Unifying, data across multiple domains, multiple business units, collating that at a level of quality that's not really achievable before, but actually then condensing all that into a single system, which can then, the call handler can go, well, what does this customer want to do? And it will give them a summary that will inform their conversation, give them the immediate things they need to do, but actually present it to them in a really nice, even way.
Is that process and the technology combinations available in other sectors though? Now, for example, a retail looking at that as well and actually deploying?
So yes, it is. And I think that the changes and the movements around that now. The biggest change for me, the thing that I'm seeing that I think is going to be the biggest change over the next few years is fundamentally how the consumer, the final consumer, will at the moment or historically, we've all just Googled something, right? Now I'm Googling less things and trying to pick through different websites. And I'm using like ChatGPT or Gemini or Perplexity more to give me that summary understanding of the thing I'm asking about, right? Now, if the model around search is changing, how does that change performance marketing? And you're seeing the impact of that on WPP at the moment. You've got major organisations not re-signing fairly significant contracts with a world-class, world-leading organisation like WPP. So that sphere is fundamentally going to shift in the next few years on how do we do performance marketing in an AI LLM world, because that's sort of important, and that's sort of how that's more important how we do things now. Because just feeding information into ChatGPT is great, right? My company does it and has done it many, many times just to increase the profile, increase the reach, and it's pretty effective, right? How you structure your website is changing fundamentally. How you structure content on the website and make it machine readable is changing fundamentally. You can see the impact on things like, just the way that WordPress is changing, and it's changing its headers and its metadata, right? So the pages that are being served on the internet are changing, and there's billions of them, hundreds of billions of them, right? So and that's online retail, online marketing. Physical retail is all around presence and putting the right information in the consumer at the right time. If I'm selling a table, how do I get ChatGPT to get me on that list of the 4 tables? It says, these are the ones you should look at. Because that's a recommendation model that didn't exist before. So, we've had recommendation engines before. We've been using them for literally years. How long since we last saw, we first saw Amazon come back with, people who bought these other pieces of tat. Probably shouldn't say that, but we've always seen that those recommendations of models of aligned personas. So if I want to go buy, what was the last thing I bought on Amazon? I can't even think. Oh yes. If I bought a new axe, I need to chop some wood. That's literally the last thing I bought.
Is that what you bought? Yeah.
That was the last thing I bought. Was a new axe. I couldn't find my old one. Obviously, it wants to sell me a shovel and some other bits, because obviously that's what we'd use an axe for. So that's it will then sort of look at people that bought axes and shovels and other things and recommend me a load of stuff. Now, the way that the models, the ChatGPT and those sort of LLMs work, they are much more context driven, and driving that context is more and more important. For like physical retail, I think the impact on the things that we currently do with LLMs specifically is all going to be around back office optimization, invoicing reconciliation, payment reconciliation, ordering, billing, timesheets. So our example internally within Bigspark is that we made the decision to re-architect all of our internal finance, holidays, people, processes using an agentic workflow, using Agent Core with Bedrock on on AWS. We sort of we are actively decommissioning that now. They're in beta test at the moment, so we'll see how that goes. It seems to be pretty promising, but we're seeing potentially, an improvement in our processes to essentially give us an extra work day, right? Not per person, but essentially half work day per person. I think I worked it out to be of additional productivity, across all of our operations. So actually, people can be doing more high value elements work now. And that's one thread we're building. We worked with the FCA quite recently on building an AI governance platform. Now, I think we'll probably touch upon that a little bit later on, so I'll probably park that and I'll go into detail. But there's the AI governance platform. How do you take synthetic data and apply it to these problems? How do you use that kind of stuff to make it more effective? Is really important. One thing that we're doing is something that, I call it starting line. It's a system, and this is the power of LLMs, right? They're really good at like heads up research. That first, 30, 40, 50% of analysis, research and generating things, right? So two of my engineers, one or two of my engineers did so we started in July, August time, probably August, beginning of August, because it's holiday time. Did an isolated piece of work where we took the problem of, well, how do we apply AI to improve the developer experience for consultants working largely on client sites? And what we identified as the biggest thing that they feel that's a problem is getting to the starting line of new projects and new ideas. So what we built is an agentic series of workflows where you can interact with Sparky, our internal chatbot, which is, it's a terrible name. It's not my fault. This is what will happen when you end up with Boaty McBoatface when you let people vote, and that's fine. I'm all for democracy. I'm not really. And you can now, from a single machine, using a local LLM using Qwen 3, essentially post an idea. You will go and then you will do the business analysis for you, and it will allow you to refine the scope of what you're doing. And then it will then, scaffold the application for you, create all your agile stories and sub stories, and give you starting point estimates. But actually, it will form up an entire project with infrastructure and code all ready for you to start work. And that takes what would normally be 3, 6, 9 months worth of work and turns it into a couple of hours. So really, it gets you to the starting line of how we can start and innovate and take new ideas forward. And that, for me, is one of the greatest things that we can do with AI right now.
Yeah. So how are you actually building that? So you mentioned Qwen 3 as the piece of kit.
Yeah, so I think I've encouraged all my engineers to expend time and energy working with local LLMs. So bring it down from Hugging Face, run it locally on their machines, and run it. So you don't need to be attached to the big ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever. You can run isolations, and you can run inference on top of those, so you can add your own data and your own level of polish to it. So I'm building upon the shoulder of giants rather than just accepting what's in front of you. I think that's the thing that's the mind shift. It looks so special, so magical. And I remember the first iteration when I still remember that first day. I did my undergraduate degree at I did my master's in IT at Stirling University, and I was from an economics background. So I spent years, or like 4 years, writing essays about market economics and all finance and great. And then I went to Sterling and did IT, and like just the simple things of creating a hash map for a dictionary was like, wow, that's really clever. And it's not clever. It's not clever. It's just stuff, right? And I remember, my first at JP's when I was, basically thrown in with DB Artisan on Sybase, right? And told, there's a bug there in this 4,000 line store procedure. Can you go fix it? And it's like, and the guy I was working with said, I'm going for lunch, right? Can you just fix it by the time I get back? It's like, oh. And that's like, it's so big and so amazing and so broad of what it can do. But actually, once you start working with it and start developing it, you end up in a situation where it's how you take advantage of it in your own. So that's the advice I'm giving to my engineers, right? It's just another tool, right? It's just another tool to add to the toolbox, like a programming language or a database or a server. It's just another tool, and we need to start treating it like another tool rather than magic, because it's not. It's just statistics.
Yeah. Well, not yet. I know a few people are trying to commercialize agentic AI now, or the agents. So I suppose we'll have to see how that develops. But before we go into the tech and the detail, can you walk us through your career so far, from banking, fintech to co-founding Bigspark?
Okay, so yeah, I started as a marketing manager at British Telecom. I was head of for a while. I was what is now BT Internet. So I was head of non-PC based internet devices. So, and this is before like mobiles were really a thing. There was a really cool. I went to China and had to bring back a clamshell based email device based. It was decked based. It was the coolest thing ever, right? It was like little clamshells, like obviously. That was sort of circa 2000 something. So I was there for a couple of years. Ended up doing sort of performance marketing, sort of marketing analysis for that. But it was much more, there was the drive at the time for BT to hit 1 million subscribers. BT Internet to get 1 million subscribers. So I was there for that journey and sort of did a few roles with BT, and then ended up off the back of that, moving into, this was all around the same time as like the dot-com bubble. So I was able to use that as a jumping off point to join JP Morgan and the research team. So I did a stint in asset management and then moved into fixed income research. That's probably where I cut my teeth in technology, learnt about databases, around how to really program software, really deliver it at scale. JP Morgan is an uncompromising place, and you have to deliver, and you have to deliver quickly. And I was so lucky to be surrounded by amazing engineers, really clever people that delivered some of the most innovative changes in trading and research that we've ever seen. And those guys are still there, and some of those guys are still there. And I randomly ran into one the other week, and he's still brilliant. He's still amazing, and he's just sitting and talking to him about the things he's doing in indexes and indexes now compared to what I worked in 20 years ago is very different. I sort of decided after 5 years at JP's, decided to make a change, move to risk at Lehman's. Was hired to do real estate risk at Lehman Brothers. It was a series of spreadsheets, and I went to my boss Steve, and Steve said, "Yeah, that was important. Don't worry, we'll work on that one in the background. It's important, but it's not highly important. Can you just go work on non-linear var, please, for FX?" I was like, "Oh, okay." I didn't know what any of those things, so I spent a long time with the Glenn Holton book on market risk and value at risk, trying to work out the maths, which, to be honest, is still sometimes is again a bit magic-y to me sometimes. It's so cool. Doing running Monte Carlo simulations on essentially computers that are not even as powerful as my phone now is amazing, right? Stints at Swiss Re, building market risk platforms, P&L platforms, Did some time at RBC doing the same stuff, and this is all banking technology. After sort of 2012, I took a bit of a break around the Olympics, and I was lucky enough to a friend of mine, a guy called Alex McIntosh, who I'd worked with at Swiss Re and had been at Lehman's with me at the same time, um, uh, randomly texted me and asked me if I was doing anything. And he said, I'm working on a fashion startup. I was like, oh, really? So I, polished up my CV, got my suit on, wandered down to see him. I think it was in just opposite Mornington Crescent, just in Camden, and we had a long chat around big data and Hadoop, and that was really my first proper. I'd done some POCs, I'd done some bits, but I was sort of touching the sides a bit. So this was my real first implementation, and we built a a quantitative analytics platform for women's apparel. So for a period of time, I could probably tell you the price of virtually every skater dress on the market, and what the best quality ones were. It was madness. So we built it all in Hadoop, scraping loads of data, materials analysis. It was for a company called Worth Global Style Network, WGSN, part of the EMAP group at the time. They've become something else now, but it's quite cool. That went live. We literally had this. This is the weirdest thing about the internet. So we would scrape a company's website, then they would pay our platform, the platform, to see their own data and our analysis of their data. It was like the most bonkers thing in the world ever. I just thought that this is madness. So I did that for a couple of years, and it went live. New York Fashion Week, I think it was, and it was pretty well received. And it's called WGSN in stock. It's still a product now. They're still running it. All my old mates have moved on, but yeah, it's still a thing. So that's my big data journey. Hadoop journey began. So I jumped ship to help Deutsche Bank build out their data lab capability for dirty data in finance. And I was lucky enough to work with a guy, with an amazing engineer and author called Paul Wilkinson, on the Deutsche Bank implementation of Hadoop, of Cloudera Hadoop, in fact. And I became an expert in something called Kerberos, and integrating Kerberos with Active Directory. Now, it sounds like it's such a niche thing. It's not that complicated, to be honest. Once you draw it out and diagram it, it's not that difficult. But it's something that's a bit of a black art because the documentation is terrible. So you do have to look at the code sometimes. And I was able to, after a few years, I left Deutsche Bank and I went to, I did have a car startup in the middle, which I'm happy to talk about.
I saw that.
You saw that. You saw CarSift. So me and a mate, Will Bicknell, who runs a travel finance company at the moment called Fellow, set up CarSift because our kids are at school together. So we used to spend ages at school. Kids, when you've got, I don't know if you've got little kids.
No.
So when you've got little kids, you spend an inordinate amount of time once they start school at kids' birthday parties. But you can't leave because they're all like 5 or 6, 7 years, and everybody gets invited. But you end up talking to the same 6 or 7 people, right? And this is my second son. So me and Will, we'd got on, and I'd been looking for a new car, and Will was had worked in the car industry, had sort of done all the promotions around. I think he did the release promotions around the Cash Guy, like a load of events and stuff. It's a great entrepreneur, a clever man, and definitely somebody you should speak to. He's very cool, especially what he's doing around Fellow. It's very, very cool stuff. But what we did was we looked at the way that, and this is how you sort of, this framing is the way that I've approached a lot more problems as I've got older, is what I'm looking at is, why is it so hard to do something? If I want to buy a car, right, I don't care. There's a group of people that care about manufacturers and models and things like I'm very much like my wife, right? I care about, performance, right? I care about the widgets inside, right? And to some extent, I care about the color, right? So what we built over the course of about 18 months or something was a capability where you could just answer some simple questions around what sort of car you liked, how you would use your car. Do you have dogs? Do you like to ride upright high, so an SUV style, or actually you're quite happy with more of a saloon style sitting? Do you have kids? Was that, how many kids do you have? Right? If you go to Auto Trader, you can't ask any of those questions because they don't really have. There's no that. So what we built was a search engine, a recommendation engine, which really did try to take those elements and turn them into 6 questions. And we did have a how much do you want to spend, and we didn't try to say how much can you afford to spend, how much do you want to spend, and then we would take, we would work out total cost of ownership of the car with the finance. Right, and plumb it all together in terms of, okay, these X cars are available and you can have them tomorrow. And we were lucky enough to win the BNP International Hackathon and were brought on board as part of their Cetelem brand in France. And I think for a while, CarSift was the 3rd largest car aggregator in France, which is just complete, it's like madness. I don't know how we got there. I think it was slightly before its time, and I think I've still got hopes of rebuilding it with the new technology when I get time, but I've got a lot of other fish to fry at the moment. But yeah, so we shuttered that. A few years ago now. Must be about 2019, something like that. Just good running. But in the meantime, I'd been busily at NatWest. I led the delivery of the Hadoop platform technically. I also led the delivery of their SaaS platform and a cybersecurity platform based upon Kafka. So I adopted Kafka for the bank and was the technical product owner for many years. The last big thing I did from a platform perspective was deliver a tactical data science platform called Magellan, and that was used quite extensively before, that was probably 5 years ago now, to actually allow, and this is probably the way I approach problems. It's like, there is the great way and the perfect way of doing things, right? And then there's what can we do now in order to unblock enough people so we can learn enough to understand whether that perfect solution is the right solution. And actually, a lot of the things we learned out of the Hadoop platform and the Kafka platform and the SaaS platform, NatWest has evolved and taken, the people at NatWest, great engineers, have taken those learnings and those understandings forward, right, to build some really quite impressive solutions. And you can see those now in the advancements in the NatWest app and the optimizations that are happening. I'm not a massive fan of them closing branches. I must admit, my mum and dad moan about it constantly. So does my wife's mum. That they're not happy around that. But the banks, and I think this is true of all the banks, they're sort of moving on. So I think the last couple of things are probably more interesting. So I spent a chunk of time, probably about 3 or 4 years, most of COVID. And this is after we formed Bigspark. So let's tell that story first, because that's probably more interesting. So Bigspark, we started, myself, Richard and Chris, as a as a consultancy to try to, well, one, work together more, because we've been quite effective in terms of delivering programs and projects and really pushing a much more an engineering mindset forward at NatWest mainly. So we decided to form up a company and sort of work together more consistently. Our first engagement with NatWest was the day it was meant to start on, like, I can't remember what day it was, but it was in April or something. But I got a phone call from a guy that's now like head of corporate data at Barclays, a guy called Dilip, and he said, yeah, no, you need to do this. The engagement was basically doing a load of Spark training for a group of engineers in data analytics. And we ended up, so Dilip said you can't do it in person, you need to do it remotely. So our first official day of trading was the day of the first lockdown. And there was three of us, me, Richard and Chris, and Pierre, our first permanent member of staff. And that was just absolutely bonkers. Absolutely and utterly bonkers. We had to rewrite all the materials. We had to, come up with methods of delivering and testing people on the fly every night. And a lot of the time we were planning to sort of walk people through individual problems and do it in person, so we could essentially use a whiteboard. But obviously that ability just went away, so it became a very different experience. And we grew in 5 years. So all three of us were directly on client side the whole time. And we grew from sort of the four of us in sort of 2000 and whenever it was, 2020 to 84 people now, something like that. I lose track sometimes. With most of those being engineers, multiple banks, NatWest, Barclays, eShore, and a couple of other startups, delivering like interesting, cool projects. For all accounts, so it's just good. I think we've grown from strength to strength. I think the one for my personal journey during that is that I spent some time in financial crime, working to deliver the NatWest PKYC solution, and I was there for about 3 or 4 years. I sort of stepped away from that program, stepped into a role, on the NatWest Marketplace program, for about 9 months. We're trying to get that over the line, and then and that pretty much takes us up to date. I told you June this year, and since June this year, I've sort of stepped into the full-time role at Bigspark, driving, like we've talked about, the agent transformation. So trying to drive forward innovation or make innovation more core to our culture again.
Yeah, that's very impressive.
I'd said it all without stopping to take a breath, mate. That's quite impressive.
Yeah, it's interesting though, because you've scaled rapidly in a market that is traditionally very difficult to get into. Technology supplying for financial services banks. There are a lot of competitors in London who are trying to do exactly that and struggle to get from one person to two. So you've got to 85 and probably 100 by the end of next year, I'm sure. So what do you think you did differently that allowed you to actually scale that quickly?
So we're not, so I think I say this quite a lot, we're not a consultancy, right? We're an engineering company. And what we tried to do consistently is put our clients first, and we do stuff, right? And it's not, you say that, but actually we're quite opinionated, and we hire really great engineers, and we try to put them in situations where they're tested, so that they develop and get much better, but they get supported by by myself, Richard and Chris and the other senior engineers and principal engineers at the company. Now, one of my engineers, who was probably Bigspark number 4 or 5, I would think. Probably actually might be 5 or 6. He joined us as a postgrad. Very entrepreneurial. It's the people we hire. So the profile is this, right? So we hired him as a graduate, very entrepreneurial, had come across from Ghana, done a master's up in Leeds, and went from like a software engineer with sort of agile experience. We dropped him into what was a fairly complicated and complex project that was going a bit south and out west. We haven't historically. We've done a few big projects where we've just been the entire team, but generally what we try to do is educate and promote, and we will drop 1 or 2 good engineers to try to help projects get over the line. That's our way of approaching things. And the point is, if you do it often enough, you build a reputation. So Joel is very good, very clever. We dropped him into a project. We supported him. He got lots of assistance, but he also got experience of, helping get a project over the line, understanding what it needs to make compromises to deliver things, but actually do it in a structured way where you bring the whole team with you rather than just trying to lift it on your own. And I think that can be the challenge sometimes with consultancies. It's really hard not to just jump in and do it all. You do need to bring the whole team with you, whether it's other consultancies or permanent members of staff, right? You do need to sell the message and need to get people to the point where they are very much, drinking the Kool-Aid. Because actually, if you're all talking off the same hymn sheet or delivering the same thing, have the same vision, actually most teams will function really, really well. And I think that's our secret sauce, that we try to just sort of get everybody to sort of see the same way, have agreements, but it's all focused on the engineering. We very rarely do pure consulting pieces, and we're very much much more on the delivery side. And that's helped us. To be fair, picking the technologies has been very, very helpful. Jumping on the bandwagon of low code tools at NatWest, specifically it's a platform called StreamSets, and sort of putting that as a competitor against something like Informatica meant that actually we were quite well positioned to actually take advantage and help deliver things. Our experience in Spark optimization, model creation has been, one of the things that we worked on originally was like one of the first models, ML models for credit cards at NatWest. Many years ago now, but essentially, I was involved in the original process for getting the funding for it, the original POC, and then we were able to sort of put teams together to sort of industrialize that. But that process took from me having, and this could have started 6 months before, right? For me being involved was actually having a prototype ready to go into production took, must have been 18 months, right? That's a long time, right? Whereas now we're in a position where we could probably, with other clients, have that same capability with sandboxing and demos available in a few weeks. And with Starting Line, it's like, well, actually, all of the bits of material that I need to create in order to make that case, I can do it in a couple of hours on my own. I don't need anybody else's help. Power of AI.
Yeah, and obviously your focus is on data engineering, building data platforms. I know you do a lot of platform engineering as well. But in terms of AI technology, I know I've seen from your website that you've kind of almost shifted the branding just so you can reach more customers and help everyone out, because you have that foundation already. But what's the focus at the minute in terms of technology solutions?
So I was out with one of our partners last night, talking about vector databases and using Postgres as a basis for distributed RAG, sort of scalable RAG solutions, and that's quite powerful. So how do I phrase it? So I think the rebranding was more around us sort of explaining the story rather than us sort of doing anything different. We still do the same things. We still do engineering. We still build platforms. We are, and I think in terms of the AI specifically, it's the case of, well, we've taken our engineering skills and applied them to a different problem space. And the rules don't change. We still, as we saw with the outage with AWS, when I jumped onto the stand-up with the AWS outage, right at 10 o'clock, whenever it was, the SRE guys said, look, we're doing some pending, waiting to get some feedback from AWS. My first answer was, no, we don't wait. Let's fail over. Let's take the step to fail over to our plan B, right? And we were back up for our services in an hour, right? Being dependent on a vendor and a particular technology, never a good idea. It's never a good idea. And it's never a bad thing to take advantage of niche technologies, but you do need to plan for not being there. I've got slightly off track. I'm going to get back. I'm going to answer your question. So the rebranding was all around us shifting, to explaining our story around AI. We hired an amazing lady, former Microsoft lady, called Kate Hughes, to spearhead our AI practice. And with that, we've been working close with the FCA on a piece of work which has become Prism, which hopefully will be releasing. We formally releasing that in the next few weeks, as a capability which provides guardrails and measurability around models going into production, and allows you to test and validate actually what it's doing and why it's doing it in a consistent way. And that'll be live on AWS, which is cool. In terms of the other things we're doing, well, I think our engineers have added AI to their toolbox, not as something as a crutch to cover up or accelerate the amount of lines of code they can write, but actually accelerate their capability of creating software that is more robust, that's more consistent with the features that need to be created. And I think that the things that we've been taken most advantage of is making sure that what we're building is consistent with what's been asked for and needed. And I think using AI to fill that gap, because that's always been a problem. That's never changes. You've got a requirements document, you've got a need, you've got problem space. They don't always completely align, and that may be again different when we actually deliver the software to go with it. So being able to iterate those three levers, right, faster is more useful and will give us better outcomes than saying, oh yeah, let's just get AI to write us some code, because that'll be close to what we're going to deliver. It could do, it might do. So in my experience, maybe in ChatGPT 8, right, ChatGPT 5 is pretty good, it gets close, but sometimes it misses the point. As the technology evolves, we'll have to evolve. But it's just like a programming language, like a database. It's a tool. We have to use it effectively in order to get what we're doing.
Yeah. I know when we break down AI into the subsets, so machine learning, automation of risk, statistical modeling, and the likes, that's been around in banking for several years. They've obviously been
Statistical risk has been core to
a long time.
capital adequacy since about 2006.
Yeah.
So it's, that was CAD 2, 20 odd years ago. Was that 2004? This was the Basel pillars from Basel 2, I think. So it's a long time ago. And we've been using statistical techniques. Like if you just take the asset swap calculations, right, to value assets in the market, bond assets in the market, those calculations, used to be able to people used to calculate them using the Texas Instruments, and that was, in the 80s. If anybody's read Liar's Poker, you can probably find a definition of when that actually was. But it's I think using statistics and risk statistics to measure your portfolio and where you are has been a thing in finance forever, right? Using models to value and determine what next best action is has evolved, and the complexity and the amount of data and capability that it can encompass has increased. But it's been around. If customer is based in South Africa, this is obviously going back into apartheid South Africa. You can't sell them X, Y, and Z products because they're sanctioned. It would be Russia now, whatever it will be. So, but we're now able to say, well, actually, it's not just that; it's this group of people with these has a higher risk profile or a higher risk of default, and you can see the layering of different technologies. It's just that now we have the ability to build. Smaller organisations are able to build that capability, right, at a much lower price point. We're able to run more complexity, and that's a function of the compute power and what we're able to bring. And that's compute's cheaper, relatively. If you were to buy a machine from HP and stick it in a wall socket, right, it's what you would get now compared to what you would get 5 years ago. You're paying the same price, but it's a lot more powerful, and you can run. You could buy okay, this is great. This morning, NVIDIA released the was the RTX 3000. It's got 72 gig of shared RAM. I could plonk that into my desktop machine at home, and it's a 7-year-old computer, so we're not talking special. And I could run like OSS GPT, 3 billion parameters without any problems. It might spill over. I need to double check that. But I was on the train. I was looking at, that's quite cool, and it costs, two grand, right? So I could run one of the most powerful models in the world for 2 grand, plus the cost of my electricity.
Yeah. So the technology is changing. It's effectively becoming more modern, more powerful. But what kind of real tangible wins are you seeing from modern AI? What have you seen over the last year or two that's actually impressed you?
It's really cool. So,
particularly with financial services and the banks that you've been working with, though.
Yeah, so I'm seeing. So, in terms of if we go through the way that. If we go through the sort of various areas that we're sort of currently involved in, the ability to respond to fraud use cases and build new models to detect fraud and analyze it, right? The velocity of that's increasing massively, right? So it doesn't, historically, it would take months and months and months, or potentially years, for us to sort of identify a fraud risk and come up with a technology solution to detect it programmatically. Like the team now, I was chatting with them the other week, our team in terms of Bigspark fraud team is sort of pulling new models together, and it's from inception to delivery we're talking 6 or 8 weeks. So the performance is just i.e. the business has identified a new fraudulent pattern, right? To build a model and detect that and get into production is taking very, very little time. It's quite flexible, and sometimes it's tweaking of models, sometimes it's changing. In terms of other areas, making decisions around mortgage acceptances, filling in the forms. I talked about originally getting that targeting of people when they call or chat, so they're actually talking to hopefully the right person on that first day. I saw an amazing use case, so cool. So we did a bit of a prototype for a that's all NDA, but I can tell you about the use case for somebody. And basically, the headsets you sometimes see in Lidl and shops where they sort of they click and they go, can somebody come to aisle blah blah blah. Those are all right. Actually, what we built was taking one of those headsets and augmenting it with AI, so people could just go tap tap and go, do we have any stock of size shirt Chevron serial number 12347, and it would go yes or no, or they could ask for a price and it would look up the price for them, or they could say, actually, can you add to the order list this product or whatever, and it would do it in real time. So actually that was using an LLM, because actually we need to, people use different words, we couldn't use an expert system, it was needed to feed into a model where they could actually understand what they were saying. And part of the additional bit that we never really worked on was positioning the store, so getting that context of physically where they are, their physical space. It was important, but you need to sort of triangulate that person's position in store. That all started to get complicated with Bluetooth receptors and long tube wires. It all sort of started to blow my mind.
Yeah. So did you build that yourself?
So we used as a platform, I think it was called Green Hoppers, and it was their back-end library. But we built the lookup module, used some with whispers and some other bits, and so, with a back-end database. So I think it was just Postgres on RDS. But yeah, it was it was cool. It was really cool. It's like, that is phenomenal. We demoed it for the whole company. That was just that was a really nice use case. It's not related to what you're talking in finance, but it was really cool. The other use case that we're working on internally is specifically around, and this sounds like such a small thing, but it's booking holidays and unbooking holidays and seeing how much time you have left remaining. So we have, like most companies, we have an ERP platform with all of that information, and you click to do it and you can do it and it's all fine, you can find it all out. But actually what we've got now is, as part of the agentic workflows, is actually you can just go to Sparky on Slack and go, how many holidays have left? Can I book a couple of weeks? And it will look in your diary, and it will look on your holiday allowance, and it will look to see what other members of your team are out that week for your client and for your thing and for your Bigspark. So we've got obviously multiple pressures here. So if, for example, we've got 2 people on a client project and they both want to be on holiday at the same time, we can work that out. They can talk to each other and sort out, but that doesn't happen. People just book holidays and don't think about the context. They don't really think about the context. And so, we've encapsulated all of that in some agents that are able to coordinate that. And that, to be honest, is a really cool, nice use of AI that is material for people. Like, just saves them that little bit of hassle. Saying, because now people just book holidays, and they just do it, and the Sparky will just say to them, actually, to be honest, that's going to be a problem. You probably no need to speak to your boss at NatWest just to confirm, because I know that you know Fred's on holiday.
Yeah.
We don't have a Fred on a holiday. That's why I picked it.
Yeah. It's funny though, because a lot of people are stressing out at the minute about AI, right, taking jobs. But from what you've described, it's basically little quick wins that are helping efficiency, automation. It's not like the AI is advising major, business strategy.
Look, I think I read in the story this morning, a 5-star general, or 4-star general in the US was using ChatGPT to make command decisions. That's probably not a good use of ChatGPT. There's not a good use of AI. We still need humans to make those key decisions and do that capabilities. I personally, maybe in 3 or 4 iterations, I think I was watching Sam Altman in an interview the other week, and he says, well, if by ChatGPT 8 it can solve like the gravity problem, would you be impressed? And it's like, yeah, but he can't do it now, right? We will get to a point where the models and the inference, like the problem is that right now, the risk of them making mistakes or not being accurate is quite high, right? And I was talking to somebody from the legal world last week, and they said, look, 80% is fine for most organisations, but it's not for us. And if you're making financial decisions that affect people, you can't rely on 80%. You can't rely on like an 80% confidence interval. Right. It requires human judgment in the end. If you're in a role that you do the same thing every day and it's quite predictable, right? I.e., it's like back office stuff at when I was at JP's 20 years ago, right? The recs, you would take the traders' notes, make sure the trades are booked correctly, follow them through, make sure things were done at the end of the day, and post the end of day P&L, right? All of that is fairly predictable. Those sort of roles will need to morph into something more value add. Otherwise, they will go. Just like, just like the mill workers went, just like the mine workers went. Industry. It's terrible to see, and it will be a big problem, right? And I hope we deal with it better than we did in both of those situations. We won't, but I hope we do. It's more a political thing than anything else. But they're just like back when open cry was a thing in trading, right? There was a certain personality and sort of person that was involved in that sort of trading. Then the Big Bang happened. It went away, not overnight, but over a period of time. And actually, that personality and that capability is largely gone now. And the world evolves, jobs evolve, jobs change. Like recruitment, right, for you guys, it's very different from what it was when I was, a jobbing contractor back in 2006, right? LinkedIn is much more sophisticated than it was back then. The databases are much more capable. I would hope you're starting to use, entity resolution to sort of match people to jobs, and using a bit of LLM to support, getting them to using LLMs to get candidates ready for interviews, right? The market moves on, the technology moves on. There's some cool stuff to do, but if the environment where we can just do the one thing for 50 years, it's when I'm not doing the same thing as when I joined BT 25 years ago, doing a very sort of different job.
Yeah, the technology just ultimately evolves.
Yeah, definitely, and I think things change, and everybody needs to evolve with them.
Yeah, you touched on FinCrime earlier, financial crime, and fraud. Obviously, we're seeing cases of fraud in the media pop up pretty much every week, possibly even every day across the globe. And it seems to be evolving faster than it ever has before. But so is AI. So do you ultimately think the technology we're creating in AI can match the speed of FinCrime and how that's evolving?
So I suspect that a lot of the fraud and the FinCrime use case that are currently being fraudulent and exploits that are being exploited are being supported by the AI that we've created. It's an arms race, right? So I got this brilliant email. Back in the day, you used to get the email from an African prince saying that needs to get rid of £100 million worth of rand or whatever it is, right? And we would just delete those, and it's just meaningless, right? But now they can use good databases with data that's publicly available data to construct an email and construct a website that's pretty close. You would struggle to tell the difference between like some of the infrastructure they put in place, and they can do it with no development capability. They can just hack something up in a few hours, run it for a few days, and then collapse it down. And frankly, the cost of implementation has gone from quite expensive, i.e., you need to know your stuff, to actually you just need to know just enough to make it work, 500 times. The key thing is, right, there's that around fraud, it tends to be locally clustered. i.e., the impactful fraud doesn't tend to be, people are quite mature online. There are obviously instances where people need to be more aware, and there's government resources on educating people on cybersecurity, and I would recommend everybody go to that and take the cybersecurity course. It is really good. It really keeps you aware, and I'll definitely recommend everybody to. And we can stick some notes in the description.
Definitely.
For that, but it is an arms race, and for every people with nefarious intent will always have an advantage in the technology, because we're always playing catch up. Because we're not, if you take, so the thing with fraud, crime and fine. So FinCrime, financial crime, is all around preventative controls. Fraud monitoring is about dealing with the outcomes of something that's already happened.
Makes
right?
sense, yeah.
So the best thing we can ever get to is a really good, high quality financial crime estate that we are talking to our customers, we are actively understanding the business they're in, we've created products and services. This is me as the bank, right? That are fit for their use and are monitored and controlled in a way that is acceptable, both to the consumer, but actually make sure they are protected. So if transactions go through that are just a bit odd, or somebody wants to spend 50,000 on a camper van from Moss Side, not saying you can't buy a camper van 50 grand on Moss Side, but feels unlikely. Or the recipient of that transaction suddenly isn't a motorhome dealer, right? We can put controls in place, and we can use the technology and the capability to almost instantaneously say, well, is it reasonable for that transaction to be in place? For that transaction, is that counterparty likely to have a camper van Is that, do they have, one of the great cases is how plausible are they when we do financial crime analysis? If you've got an income of, if you said on your statement for a corporate entity that you're running an online bookshop, right, and you live in a 1-bedroom flat in Tower Hamlets, it's obviously near here, how likely is that? And if your revenue's 100,000, 200,000 a year, right, that doesn't feel plausible, right? So the models analysis is getting to the point where they can make that plausibility analysis, given the right data in the right way. And I think that's the way to stop fraud, is actually getting the technology and the capability to the point where it's looking at the various things that people are doing with their accounts and just understanding whether that's should be allowed to do stupid things with their money, right? People do. That's
the point of having money.
Exactly, right? But banks should be responsible to ensure that we're informed that potentially the people we're spending money with aren't what they describe themselves to be. And I think that's the thing that we need to get to. And I think there's a lack of trust with what banks are trying to achieve with this technology. And I think it's being used to drive down headcounts and do things like that rather than deliver real value for customers.
Yeah. So within the banks, if you spend a certain amount, say a threshold like £50,000 or even less than that, does it flag in their system?
I think there's some. So I'm going to stray onto stuff that I'm not 100% sure of. So there is some legislation now that if you're a victim of fraud and the bank didn't follow a certain set of procedures, that essentially the banks plural, i.e. both counterparties to the transaction, are liable for part of that transaction. They need to, if they haven't done all of the right steps in the right way. So they're very key. That's why we've got a lot of the defensive. Are you sure you want to spend this money now? Do you really sure? Do you know this person type thing, right? And I think those are the controls they've started to put place to ask people whether they are understood the nature of the transaction they're currently undergoing. I personally think the technology could go further, right? I personally think that actually and this is not fit for everybody, so everybody has a different profile, right? You and me, quite sophisticated in terms of our use of technology, our use of the internet, right? But take my parents, actually asking them a number of questions around what they're spending and why, right? And explaining why they're doing it, right, would be quite helpful.
Definitely, yeah.
Right? Suddenly, if they're sort of buying say they're buying a 7-year-old Nissan Leaf and somebody wants £10,000 for it. That's a lot of money for a Nissan Leaf, right? Relatively, right? Should the bank be providing that as a service, saying, look, actually, is that actual value for money? Are you sure you've spoken to the right people, right? And that's a technology thing. That's not something that it's one of those classic things where people are buying something online and it's, they're buying it from Alibaba and they bought a picture. I've literally done this up on auction site. I thought I was buying a big picture frame, and I misread the description, and it was my fault, and it wasn't a lot of money. It was like 20 quid, and I drove to the local auction to pick it up, and it was literally about this big. And that was classic. It's like I sort of bigged it up to my wife and said, it's like silver and it's really nice and it's all silver plated and it's really nice and we can just use this picture and this picture. But I thought it was going to be a bit about that big, and it's comes out like that's. And I think though that differential comparison is quite important, but then that requires the bank to have an opinion, and it's not really, banks aren't allowed to have opinions
No.
on how people spend their money.
Yeah. I saw a quote, I wrote it down. Every bank is investing millions to make AI detect fraud, but nobody wants to admit the same AI technology is actually the thing committing it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, so I'll go back to my example about the prince, the African prince sending me money, right? I literally got a similar email, and I spotted the link, but actually it was all branded in, I think it was Royal Bank of Canada, and it was all pucker. It looked really like on the money. Had my name, had the times when I worked at RBC, knew who my sister was. And it's like, okay, this is just a bit close. All probably from publicly available information. There's no phishing involved. There's no, it's not fished for any data. It's like, okay, that's quite good, guys. Well done.
Yeah. How are you and Bigspark combating this next wave of financial crime then? How do you approach it?
So I think for us, so we've got a couple of different things we're working on in the background. So we think that the current approach to like entity resolution and working out associated parties, either via transactions or via relationships in Companies House or whatever, it's just quite hard and expensive. So we're working on a platform called Tangerine in the background, which simplifies that whole process and industrializes all of the existing data that sits in that environment. We have a whole load of work that we've done for synthetic data. So for like AP fraud and push fraud, those synthetic data sets currently sit in the FCA sandbox. So people can build new models, new capabilities. We are synthesizing new data sets for different sorts of frauds as soon as we understand them, and we're trying to make those available and promote those and the usage of those. Those obviously are commercial assets. We're about to go live. So our synthetic data product Hazel is about to go live on the AWS marketplace, so people can consume those new fraud assets almost immediately. So that's really our process. It's like we're not, we are, and in our clients, we're not writing the models, we're not creating the core models. We are industrializing them, getting them into production in a way that's scalable, reliable, testable, and can be relied on. So it's not just 40 lines of Python. It's real tested, engineered code that we understand. We have a clear understanding of how the model works, and we're able to test and validate and perform ongoing training and monitoring and maintenance.
Yeah, and you're already able to do that. So what's the biggest myth about AI in the financial services industry?
It's not that, so I wish people would stop using AI to try to predict the future, because it's a terrible idea. I think because it has a load of historical data, and you can use models to predict the future, or predict, like we use it for cash flow forecasting. Right, it's good for that. It's good for giving a confidence score on different deals or whatever.
As a prediction.
As a prediction, but it's a confidence score, right? And I think that's the biggest, when you get an answer out of AI, it's not a yes or a no. It's a yes at 80% of confidence. So in 1 in 5 times, it's wrong. Right? That's the biggest myth. right? It's not always right, right? You need to understand statistically, because essentially it is, you know, an LLM is literally, it's really clever at guessing the next word, and it just does that consistently across, you know, potentially thousands of words quite well. Not quite well, it does it bloody amazingly. But that's what it's doing. And I think that's the myth, right? It's not magic, it's really, really clever statistics.
How do you identify when ChatGPT isn't correct? So when you look at the information it gives you, and it always sounds very confident when it delivers that message, how can you possibly know whether that information, the data, is actually accurate?
So if you're in an environment where you're the SME, then read the references, make sure they exist, make sure they're consistent. You know, essentially, it's a good way of summarizing a load of work, right? If you're the SME, if you don't have like subject matter expertise in that area, right? Ask the same question or give that outcome to another model and get it to check it for you, right? In my experience, right? Read what it's right. Check the references. Ask for the references. You know, look at the thinking, because that always gives you an indication of whether it's just guessing, or it's, you know, hallucinating, or it's not. Because I've had a situation where I had a defect. It was a really weird one. I built a website, and I was migrating from one version of like Vercel to another. I think that was it. And I remember reading the docs and, you know, this was probably one of my first proper uses of AI to sort of help try to accelerate me to do something. And I went, okay, so here's my code. I was actually using Claude. That was it. I was using Claude. And I was using Claude code. And I said, okay, I want to upgrade from Vercel 4 to Vercel 5, which is basically a back-end technology that's all with websites and databases and does all of my migrations and stuff. It's clever stuff. And I said, just gave it the prompt, can you upgrade? It's like, okay, fine. It got about halfway and it sort of got stuck. And it said, oh, you need to do this, this, and this. And I went, no, I read something in the docs that says that's not true. So I went back to the docs and went, okay, no, that's what I understood was correct, and the model was wrong. So, but I had to tell it 3 times that it was wrong and give it the link. And still it went, about 2 prompts later, went, oh, no, we need to do back to the other thing. So having subject matter expertise and doing the actual research is quite important.